A cold wind sweeps across a vast, endless sea of golden grass. The horizon stretches in every direction. No forests, no shade, not even a whisper of wood in sight. Just the boundless sky and the hum of survival. Now imagine building a home here, with nothing to build from. For the native nations of the Great Plains, the Lakota, the Blackfoot, the Comanche, and many others, this wasn't just a setting, it was a test. A test of ingenuity, balance, and respect for the land. They lived in a world where herds of buffalo thundered across the plains, yet the most valuable resource wasn't the buffalo, it was the tree, and there were almost none. In this landscape, every stick, every root, every splinter mattered. Wood wasn't something you found, it was something you earned. Gathered from fallen river logs, traded across miles, or carried between migrations like treasure. So how, in this treeless wilderness, did they build one of the most enduring and iconic homes in human history? The teepee. Most people see the teepee as simple. A few poles, some hide, a fire inside. But what if the teepee was never just a shelter? What if it was the perfect solution to scarcity? A design so efficient, so revolutionary, that it turned a lack of wood into an advantage. Before we reveal how, pause for a second, because every day we uncover stories like this. Tales of Native American genius, of ancient survival that rivals modern engineering. If you love discovering the wisdom that built civilizations from nature itself, make sure you hit subscribe and step deeper into the knowledge that still shapes our world. Because what you're about to see isn't just the story of a tent on a plain. It's the story of how an entire civilization rewrote the rules of architecture, energy, and community. All in a world where wood was almost extinct. And somehow, they didn't just survive, they thrived. Welcome to Great Plains wood scarcity, teepee's hidden secrets. The Great Plains stretch across the heart of North America, a land of endless sky and wind, where grass ripples like waves and the horizon feels infinite. But for all its beauty, this vast expanse concealed one of the greatest survival challenges imaginable: the absence of trees. For the native peoples who called these plains home, wood was more than just a building material. It was life itself. It fueled their fires, shaped their weapons, built their shelters, and warmed their nights. Yet on these open plains, trees were rare, growing only along distant riverbanks or scattered creek beds. A single fallen log could be as valuable as a buffalo hide. Winter storms could strike without warning, dropping temperatures far below freezing. Without trees, there was no easy source of firewood, no forest canopy to break the wind. Even cooking, tool-making, or repairing a damaged lodge meant making hard choices: conserve wood or risk losing warmth. Yet this was not a people defeated by scarcity. It was a people transformed by it. They adapted their entire way of life around efficiency, movement, and ingenuity. The lack of wood didn't limit them, it refined them. Every resource, bone, hide, grass, and even buffalo dung became part of a new, sustainable system designed to replace what nature withheld. This invisible struggle shaped their culture, their architecture, and their spiritual understanding of balance. Because when you live in a world that gives little, you learn that survival isn't about abundance. It's about respect. In this endless land of wind and sky, the Plains tribes mastered the art of turning nothing into everything. When the land denies you, you learn to listen more closely. The Great Plains tribes didn't fight against scarcity. They outsmarted it. Their genius wasn't in what they had, but in what they could make from what seemed like nothing. In a world without forests, every fragment of nature became a resource, waiting to be reimagined. Without firewood, they turned to buffalo dung, or chips, as early settlers later called them. Dried in the sun, it burned cleanly, producing steady heat and little smoke. A perfect, renewable fuel. Where others saw waste, they saw warmth. In the howling cold of winter, buffalo chips glowed quietly inside teepees, transforming scarcity into survival. Tools and utensils that required wood were instead carved from bone and horn. Elk antlers became digging tools. Buffalo ribs formed sled runners and scrapers. Even weapons adapted. Hafts and handles were made of rawhide stretched stiff, or from the few wooden pieces carried from previous camps. Each object told a story of patience and innovation. Proof that mastery of nature meant flexibility, not domination. Containers weren't wooden boxes. They were rawhide vessels, woven grass baskets, and bone ladles. Durable, lightweight, and sustainable, these items made the nomadic lifestyle possible, cutting dependence on fragile materials. And yet, none of this felt like compromise. It was ingenuity born from respect. They never cursed the land for what it lacked. They thanked it for what it still gave. The Great Plains tribes didn't merely endure their environment, they reshaped it into a living ally. Their solutions reveal something extraordinary. Scarcity didn't make them weaker. It made them smarter. When nature whispered limits, they answered with innovation. To outsiders, a teepee might look simple: poles, hide, and smoke. But simplicity can hide genius. In the treeless world of the Great Plains, the teepee wasn't just a home. It was a masterpiece of minimalism. A design that solved the crisis of wood scarcity with elegance and precision. At its core, the teepee's secret was efficiency. It required only about a dozen or so long poles, usually lodgepole pine or spruce, slender, strong, and light enough to transport from one camp to another. These poles were so valuable that entire families shared or traded them. Some were passed down for generations, cared for as living relatives. The teepee's conical shape wasn't chosen by chance. It was the result of centuries of observation. That aerodynamic design deflected wind, prevented snow buildup, and stabilized the structure in fierce storms. The cone also maximized heat retention, allowing a small interior fire to warm the space efficiently with minimal fuel. Inside, an inner liner of hides or cloth created an air pocket that trapped warmth, while the smoke flaps at the top acted as adjustable vents, ancient air conditioning, perfectly tuned to nature's rhythm. Even its portability was revolutionary. Those few poles, carefully bundled, could be carried on travois pulled by dogs or horses, turning scarcity into mobility. When trees were too far to reach, poles were borrowed, traded, or reused year after year, an early system of circular resource management. The teepee was not a product of poverty. It was a solution of intelligence. It transformed limited wood into infinite shelter, proof that true design doesn't need excess. It needs understanding. And within that design lies a secret modern architecture still struggles to grasp. When humans build with nature, they build to last. In a land where trees were rarer than rain, no family could afford to live alone. Scarcity demanded community, and the Great Plains tribes turned cooperation into their greatest survival tool. The story of the teepee isn't just one of design, it's one of shared strength, built on trust, trade, and balance. Teepee poles, for example, weren't always locally sourced. Some tribes traveled vast distances, sometimes hundreds of miles, to reach the forested foothills of the Rockies or river valleys where long, straight trees could be found. These poles were cut carefully, dried, and carried home through trade or migration. In regions where wood was nearly absent, families shared poles between seasons or traded them as precious commodities. One lodge's structure could serve another the following year. A silent network of resource sharing that stretched across nations. Communities organized resource collection like clockwork. Groups worked together to gather dried buffalo dung for fuel, grass for bedding, and clay for tools. These weren't just chores, they were acts of unity. Every member, from child to elder, played a role in ensuring the group's survival through the long, bitter winters. Trade routes became arteries of cooperation, connecting tribes from the plains to the mountains. Wood from the west, flint from the north, shells from the south. Everything moved through reciprocal exchange rather than exploitation. Scarcity didn't create greed. It created gratitude. The teepee stood as a symbol of that philosophy. Its poles held not just hide and cord, they held stories, friendships, and alliances. Because on the Great Plains, survival wasn't about having more, it was about sharing wisely. And in that lesson, these nations built something far stronger than wood. They built resilience. To survive a Great Plains winter without trees meant mastering one of humanity's oldest challenges, keeping the fire alive. In a world of endless grass and biting winds, Native American tribes crafted an ingenious system of fuel that didn't depend on wood at all. They learned to draw warmth not from forests, but from the very life that roamed the plains, the buffalo. When dried under the sun, buffalo dung transformed into one of the most efficient, sustainable fuels on Earth. Light, smokeless, and long-burning, it could heat a teepee for hours with just a handful of chips. Children often collected them during the day, stacking them carefully near the entrance of each lodge like bundles of firewood. When ignited, the odor was faint, earthy, a reminder of the animal that had already given food, clothing, and tools. Even in death, the buffalo continued to sustain life. Fire pits inside the teepee were crafted with precision. Stones lined the base to store and release heat, while the smoke flaps above vented fumes without wasting warmth. At night, the fire was banked with ashes to preserve embers until morning, a delicate balance of science and instinct. When storms swept across the plains and wood was impossible to find, these fires never died. They symbolized not just survival, but mastery, proof that necessity fuels innovation. The Great Plains tribes had turned waste into warmth, scarcity into sustainability. Every ember glowed with gratitude, every flame whispered resilience, because the secret to warmth in a treeless world wasn't firewood, it was knowledge. Knowledge of the land, of the buffalo, and of the patience to adapt rather than conquer. In the plains, even the ashes carried wisdom. In the heart of the Great Plains, survival depended not on permanence, but on movement. To chase the herds, avoid storms, and find fresh resources, Native American families needed homes that could move as quickly as the seasons, and none achieved that better than the teepee. Unlike fixed dwellings, the teepee was an architectural miracle of portability. A complete lodge could be dismantled in less than an hour, its hides folded and its poles bundled into a neat frame. Once packed, these poles became part of a travois, a wooden sled pulled first by dogs and later by horses after their introduction to the plains. With this simple invention, an entire household, shelter, bedding, tools, and fuel could travel vast distances across the open prairie. But the brilliance didn't stop at mobility. The teepee was designed to be rebuilt endlessly, without structural loss. Poles that had stood in one valley could be reused in another, carried across hundreds of miles. Each hole in the hide covering matched perfectly to the next setup, showing a level of craftsmanship and consistency few modern tents can match. Even smoke flaps, door flaps, and liners were adaptable, easily adjusted for different climates or wind directions. This mobility wasn't just a practical choice, it was a philosophy. The Plains tribes saw the earth not as something to be possessed, but to be partnered with. They carried only what the land allowed, never more. When they left a camp, nothing remained but flattened grass and memories. In a world where modern society builds heavier and consumes faster, their lightweight lifestyle feels prophetic. They proved that a home doesn't have to be anchored to endure. It only needs to belong where it stands. In a landscape defined by scarcity, the Great Plains tribes discovered a truth modern civilization often forgets. No one survives alone. The secret to their endurance lay not only in resourcefulness, but in the invisible threads of trade and alliance that connected nations across thousands of miles. When the plains couldn't provide, relationships did. Tribes near the foothills of the Rocky Mountains harvested long, straight pine and spruce trees, ideal teepee poles, and traded them to eastern and southern tribes in exchange for hides, meat, or crafted goods. Every pole that stood in a lodge carried with it the memory of journey and friendship. These trade routes were the arteries of survival, pumping life through the heart of the continent. It wasn't just wood that moved along these paths. Firestones, obsidian, pigments, and dried herbs all flowed from one community to another, enriching not only their material lives, but their cultural wisdom. Trade wasn't transactional, it was relational. It built diplomacy, peace, and shared learning among tribes like the Lakota, Crow, Arapaho, and Kiowa. When horses entered the plains world, these networks expanded even further. Mobility turned cooperation into civilization, allowing knowledge, materials, and even songs to travel across vast distances. The land itself became a living marketplace, one without walls or greed. And through it all, the teepee stood as both home and symbol. Its poles, hides, and cord represented the collective effort of communities bound by respect rather than ownership. Trade, at its heart, was never about gaining more. It was about giving balance. The Great Plains people survived not because they had everything, but because they shared everything. And in that sharing, they created something rarer than wood. Unity. The Great Plains were beautiful, but brutal. A land of sudden tempests, freezing gusts, and skies that seemed to move faster than the ground. In this ever-changing environment, survival required architecture that could dance with the wind rather than fight it. And so, the Plains tribes created one of humanity's most aerodynamic structures, the teepee. Every curve, every angle of the teepee's frame was intentional. Its conical shape wasn't just aesthetic. It was physics in harmony with the elements. The slanted walls diverted wind instead of resisting it, preventing collapse even in violent storms. When snow piled high, it slid down naturally, preventing weight from crushing the lodge. And because the poles met at a single point above, tension distributed evenly, allowing the entire structure to flex like a living being. The teepee breathed. The smoke flaps at the top, guided by wooden pegs, acted like lungs, opening and closing with the wind's direction, drawing fresh air in and releasing smoke out. The inner liner created a layer of trapped air, working as insulation long before the word existed. Warmth from a single fire could raise the interior temperature dramatically, while the floor coverings of hides and grass trapped heat from escaping through the frozen ground. And yet, this was done with minimal wood. Just a few poles, often reused for years, carefully maintained, and even named, supported the entire structure. The tribes had achieved what modern design constantly strives for: maximum strength, minimal material. Each teepee was more than a shelter. It was a living equation, proof that when design respects nature's forces instead of opposing them, survival becomes effortless. The wind was their enemy only until they learned to let it flow through their walls. To the people of the Great Plains, conservation wasn't a concept. It was a way of life. In a land where wood was precious and every natural gift was limited, waste was not only unwise, it was disrespectful. Theirs was a culture guided by restraint, gratitude, and balance long before sustainability became a modern idea. Every resource was used to its fullest. A single buffalo could feed, clothe, warm, and shelter an entire family. Its bones became tools, its hide became walls, its sinew became cordage. Nothing was discarded. Even ashes from fires were returned to the earth, completing the cycle from fuel to soil. This was not minimalism, it was reciprocity. The same philosophy governed their use of wood. Teepee poles were never cut carelessly. Trees were selected from riverbanks or forests with care, often after giving a spoken offering or prayer. Each cut carried intent. Take only what is needed and only when the land allows. When poles grew too old, they were repurposed for fires or tools, ensuring every fiber served a purpose from birth to ash. This mindful approach extended to everyday life. Children were taught early that excess weakens survival. A teepee that used too much material was harder to carry. A fire that burned too hot consumed precious fuel. Balance was the rule. Efficiency, the art. While modern society builds bigger and burns faster, the Plains tribes found strength in simplicity. They understood that abundance comes not from taking more, but from needing less. And in their restraint lay freedom. Freedom from greed, waste, and dependency. Because to live lightly upon the earth is not sacrifice, it's wisdom. The story of the Great Plains is not just a chapter of survival. It's a mirror held up to our modern world. Today, surrounded by abundance, technology, and comfort, we rarely stop to ask, how much do we really need? The Plains tribes answered that question centuries ago, through innovation born from scarcity and balance born from respect. Their world without trees became a classroom of creative sustainability. When resources were few, they learned to design better, use smarter, and waste nothing. They built portable homes that breathed with the land, found fuel in unexpected places, and shared what little they had without competition. Scarcity didn't divide them, it united them. These lessons echo louder today than ever before, as our planet faces deforestation, energy crises, and environmental collapse. The wisdom of the Plains offers a clear truth. Survival isn't about having more, it's about understanding what's enough. The teepee, the travois, the buffalo chip fire, these weren't relics of a primitive age, but blueprints for balance. Modern sustainability movements often look forward for solutions, but perhaps the real answers lie behind us, in cultures that lived within their means and left the land unharmed. Their design principles can inspire green architecture, renewable energy use, and ethical consumption today. The Great Plains tribes didn't just survive a treeless world, they thrived in harmony with it. And in doing so, they proved that progress doesn't come from mastering nature. It comes from learning from it. Their world of wind and grass still whispers to us, reminding humanity that true innovation begins not with invention, but with respect. As the wind quiets over the Great Plains and the grass ripples under the fading sun, we're left with one lasting truth. Scarcity didn't break these people. It shaped their genius. From treeless horizons, they built warmth, community, and resilience. From the whisper of the wind, they built knowledge. Knowledge that still speaks if we're willing to listen. Every pole of a teepee, every ember of buffalo chip fire, every traded gift of pine or birch carried the same message. Take only what you need, give thanks for what you take, and live light upon the earth. That wasn't just survival. It was philosophy, and it's one the modern world desperately needs to remember. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden brilliance of the Great Plains, if it reminded you that technology is nothing without wisdom, then don't let the lesson end here. Subscribe to our channel because every day we uncover new stories of Native American innovation, ancient engineering, and survival strategies that still outsmart the modern world. Share this video with someone who believes progress only moves forward, Because sometimes the greatest lessons come from those who lived closest to the land. And tell us in the comments, which invention or idea amazed you most? The resource sharing networks, the buffalo fuel, or the teepee's architectural perfection? These aren't forgotten tales. They're blueprints for the future. Because in the silence of the Great Plains, where the wind still hums through the grass, the wisdom of the ancestors still whispers. You don't need more to live better. You only need to live wiser.